So our topic today, RPA, Robotic Process Automation. Now, I would say this is definitely more well known than it was perhaps 3 or 4 years ago. But for those in our audience out there who may not be so familiar with RPA, perhaps you could give us an overview of what it's really all about.
Yeah, maybe I can help to address that. Yeah.
Okay.
So RPA, Robotic Process Automation, you can think of it as a software agent, right? A digital assistant that kind of help you with some of the very repetitive, very mundane and rule-based tasks, right? That means when you start to do your work, you interact with your SAP, you interact with your WMS, your Outlook, your Excel spreadsheet, and you do a lot of this stuff day in, day out. Yep. So not all your mouse click and all your keystroke, right? That's where we want to configure a software agent to actually help you with that, right? So just a simple example, it could be that every day you need to do some shipment entries and you got a Excel spreadsheet with a few hundred lines, right? That you need to kind of type it into a certain systems and you spend an hour and an hour and a half to do that. So instead of you doing that, the software agent can actually help you to do that faster as well as more accurate. Yeah. So we want to kind of so-called take the process out of the human, right? In terms of things that you don't really enjoy doing in the first place, I would say. Yeah. So that it can actually kind of free up the time. So basically RPA is actually trying to do that. And of course, especially in the last 2 to 3 years, right? Actually, RPA has kind of even expanded a little bit, right? In terms of collaborating with other technologies like a chatbot, for example, or with machine learning, for example, so that we can actually start to even address even higher value and even slightly more cognitive kind of work, right? That is actually able to do. Yeah. So I hope that's give everybody a good foundation of roughly what is RPA is about. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So I think you mentioned just now about taking the process out of the human. So maybe it sounds like RPA could be a fantastic way to replace people and reduce headcount in the organization.
Yeah, I guess maybe I can start with that and Paras can chip in later on. Yeah. So I think there is always this the fear there, right? And also I think in the internet, I think people look around and they kind of get worried, right? If the robot take over my job, whether a hardware or actually even a software robot, I think we are all familiar with the factory automation era, right? So does it mean that I'm going to lose my job? Well, that's not necessarily always the case, right? And actually more often than not, that's not the case. Yep. Maybe I can share with you, as I mentioned, I interact with a lot of customers and I can share with you, some of the things that they tell me, right, in terms of why they are looking for automation. Yep. So one of the things is that a lot of times they have people doing a lot of this stuff and people are overworked. Yeah, they kind of work until 9 p.m., 10 p.m. daily because there's just so many things to do and actually a large chunk of that is really so-called low value work, right? As I mentioned, data entries and copy paste, right, between an Excel and an application and so on. So by automating all this work, first of all, is that instead of people getting overburdened and working 12 hours days and so on, right? They have a better work-life balance and increase the employee satisfaction and get them more motivated, for example. Yeah. And at the same time, they're also business that's also experiencing a tremendous growth, right? Business growth, right? Even despite the COVID period that we have in the last 1.5 years, there are actually certain segments that actually experience decent growth, right? Whether pre or post-COVID. And the reality is that as your business, let's say, expand 10 or 20% a year, there's just no way that you're going to expand your headcount 10 or 20% year on year, right? Because that's going to be not just in terms of the human capital that you need to invest in and maybe some office space and the training and getting them up to speed. And that's where kind of RPA comes in, right? Whereby we can look at having doing more with less, right? So with the same number of people who maybe still handle some of the higher value work, we want to free up the people from doing all this low value work so that they can actually focus, right? They can actually touch on all this higher cognitive work, interacting with the customer. So instead of trying to type all these things into the system, why not, right? Go out and talk and understand, talk to the customer, talk to the logistic talk to the 3PL and so on, right? So that they can understand and kind of serve the customer better. Yeah. And maybe Paras, you can share some of your experience, based on your interaction also. Yeah.
Sure, Kumyung. Thanks for that. I think that's a great uh, way of explaining, what really RPA is. And I would just want to add a few things to what Kumyung shared earlier. So now when it comes to RPA, I think you're right, Bob. There are some conceptions. I wouldn't call it right or wrong, but there are some conceptions that RPA is an easy way out to replace some of the human workforce. And to add on to what Kumyung said earlier, I think the right way to look into RPA is that think about RPA as your digital assistant, somebody who's joining your team, not to replace you, but work very closely with you collaboratively, and also make sure that, you as a human manager or as a person who's going to manage the robot, you are going to probably lay down the foundation on how the robot is going to work out the processes that you intend it to do. Now, there are few ways on also to look into what kind of robotic process automation options do you have. Now, we usually categorize it into two parts. One is unattended automation, and the other is attended automation. Without going into too much into the details, the long story short is this: just like as you in your team, you have a few senior people who bring a wealth of experience and they can do a lot of multitasking. You also have the same option in RPA where you could have a senior robot and a junior robot. I know I'm making it very simplistic, but I want to make sure our audience can connect well to it. And making sure that, the fact that what we have experienced with our customers, we have seen that, with what kind of robot you can deploy, whether it is a senior robot or a junior robot, it really depends on the kind of process you have. Now, one thing we advocate to all our customers is not every process is suitable for RPA, right? You have to take it with a pinch of salt that some processes are well managed and done, or they're moderated properly as in the current avatar they have, which means the humans are working on it. But at the same time, most of the processes that you might have in your organization, and that can cut across any department, are quite suitable for RPA. And this is where your digital assistant, your team member really comes in to support you and take over all those mundane, monotonous tasks and activities that you do it on a daily basis. And I think I have a good slide that I can share with the audience here to better explain my point. So let me bring up the slide now. So yeah, like I said earlier, it's all about collaboration between the bot and the human. And we are here to create that synergistic relationship between the two. Now, on the left-hand side, you could have a senior robot, which we call as unattended automation. And you can pretty much assume that, it is capable of doing multiple tasks at the same time. It can take a few processes. It can make some complex decisions for you. And as a full-time assistant for you, it can really be initiated, or it can be scheduled to run on a specific time of the day, and it can complete the task without intervention. But as we also know, in the realistic scenario, we have people who have a lot of tasks which requires human intervention. We have another flavor, which is like an attended automation, where you can direct, you can manage the robots and telling them, okay, do this, and then move on to the next task. You can lay out an entire roster for them for the full day, for the full week, for the full year as well. And then the robots can quietly work in the background and they can assist, notifying you, not obstructing anything that you're doing, and quietly telling you that my job is done. Is there anything that I can do for you as well? So broadly, like I said, it's all about hybrid automation. The RPA technology is not to replace humans. It is there to augment what you do on a daily basis, how you carry out your tasks and activities. So you as a human can offload all your repetitive, monotonous tasks to the robot, and you can spend more time in doing productive activities and making sure that you can partake and could decide on more important decisions that matter for your organization.
All right. Okay. I think that's a good explanation to probably a very common question about RPA. Now, just before we dive in to talk about logistics, it sounds like RPA is very applicable to a wide variety of industries, because every industry will use processes. So where is it seeing the greatest adoption right now, and why is it in those industries is it taking off in a big way?
Right. So again, a very good question, Bob, and I think this is something that we come across every time we have customers who are interested in perhaps bringing in digital transformation and automation. So The right way to look into this is that RPA is not an industry-specific technology. It's really industry agnostic, right? So it cut across all industry. Like for example, you have finance, you have manufacturing, you have healthcare, which has seen a tremendous adoption of RPA due to the pandemic and going forward as well. And not far behind is actually supply chain, logistics, and shipping as well. So where all this information that we have collected over the few years, we have seen that ever since in 2020 we got stuck with the pandemic and we are still feeling the effects. 94% of Fortune 1000 companies actually face supply disruptions, and well, in 2021 still 68% are facing some kind of disruption. We had the pandemic, then we had a major 10 billion trade blockage due to the Suez Canal obstruction, right? That also really exposed the flaws that we have in running the supply chain in a very obsolete manner. And then going forward, what we have also seen that more than 63% of top 100 logistics companies have actually adopted RPA in one form or the other. And it really cut across entire marketing operations, the departments that you have. You have supply chain, you have operations, you have IT, you have even finance and HR who are adopting RPA as well. So as I said earlier, it's a non-intrusive technology. It's much simpler to deploy. It doesn't take us years and months to talk about RPA. We are talking about a matter of a few weeks. And it was also a very good insight for all these industries, specifically supply chain, to kind of look back into the process you have, see whether it is optimized, in tune, in sync with today's time, the challenges and the risks that we are looking at, and then probably take this initiative a step forward and bring in RPA to overcome those challenges and obstructions as well.
Okay, thanks, Paras. So switching gears a bit, right? I think what we spent the last 15 minutes or so doing is talking about at a high level the benefits of RPA. So that sets the context, of what we want to talk about. So let's talk specifically about logistics and supply chain. Can you give us potential or actually real life applications of RPA in logistics and supply chain?
Yeah, maybe I can go first. Yeah. So maybe just I think late last year, right? I was actually working with a logistic player, one of the larger logistic player. And what they really want to do is really to see how RPA can help them to process shipment documents. Yep. So for this supplier, or rather for this logistic player, they have a lot of customers, right? And they want to kind of like pilot, starting with one of their largest customer, whereby they have something like the 5 to 6 shipment a day. And each shipment will have a few hundred pages of shipment documents, which I believe everybody is probably from this industry, right? You have the packing list, you have the invoice, you have the bill of lading, and so on and so forth. Yep. So what they really want to do is to see how RPA can actually look into this whole bunch of PDF documents, few hundred pages, and extract out all the invoice information. Yep. So one shipment could have up to 50, 60 different invoices, and they want to extract things like the billing document number, the invoice total, and some metrics around the handling units, right? The weight, and then the total, and the volume, and so on and so forth. Yeah. And the reality here is that even for just this one of their biggest customer, they are already having 2 people daily. Yep, spending about 2 to 3 hours each, right? Just to kind of handle and process all these things. So we actually come in and actually help them to use RPA, right? To actually kind of look through this whole bunch of massive amount of information and extract the information, that the specific 7 or 8 pieces of information that they need from each individual invoices, and kind of key them in, right, into the systems and so on. And what it means is that, from 2% having to spend 2 to 3 hours a daily, right, on processing, the robot itself can actually do this thing in less than 20 minutes. Yep. So what this means is that now this person, who's already overworked, right? So now they have a little bit more time, and they can spend more time, maybe calling up, the customers, and, building better relationships, rather than, scouring through, tons of documents and trying to enter the information into the system. So that's actually a example that I have, right? That I'm sharing here, and I'm sure Paras will have more to share. Yeah.
Sure.
But Kamyong, before we hear from Paras, so that's using RPA with an OCR application, I'm assuming.
That's correct. Yeah, Dr. Raymond.
Okay.
In fact, that's OCR plus actually some machine learning, right, to actually be able to get all the information. That's right.
So we probably want to talk a bit about that later as well, because I see some of the questions coming in, where people talk about Industry 4.0 and digitalization. So maybe if we have time, we can also address this about the integration of using RPA with other technologies like OCR and machine learning as well. Yeah. Paras, you were going to say something before I cut you off.
No worries. So yeah, I would want to add on to what Kumyo mentioned earlier. Let me also share a very realistic example of what we are doing for one of the largest vessel operators globally. So our customer is, has almost 3,000 vessels, and has a huge fleet that they are going to, implement very soon. Now, what happened is that, for this customer, they have this very typical traditional vessel scheduling process, where they have to visit the terminal operators, they have to visit various port websites, and probably do a lot of data scraping to understand, the schedules, prepare the ETDs and ETAs. And of course, it was a very time-consuming process. And because it's such a large operation, they had almost 27 dedicated members who were just spending day in and day out to go through these various websites, 40 plus of them, and try and understand, how the schedules are being updated over there. And another interesting part was that, apart from looking at their own schedules and making sure that, they can get the data out ASAP, they also were interested to see what their competitors are looking into. But because this was quite a monotonous task, and it had a lot of detailed evaluation that had to be done while carrying out the activities, our customer actually decided to implement RPA for this. And what we did is we simply deployed a robot which is capable to go across all 40 websites, carry out the data scraping, look at the various schedules that are updated in real time, and also make sure that it can push that data back into the customer's enterprise system. Now, with that, what has happened is that the 27 people that we are talking about, of course, they are not being asked to leave, or they have not been replaced, but they have been assigned into a more I would say higher degree operations, that they are working together with their managers, with their country heads, and making sure that they can bring in the analytical part to it as well, and bring about a competitive edge in terms of how they can quote to their customers and make sure that their schedules are always up to date.
So that's a great example, Paras. So let me just cut you off there, because I think that's related to a question that Bob actually asked earlier as well. It's not about replacing people and making them redundant and putting them out of a job, right? You deploy them to higher value added roles. Yeah. So let me ask you this then, just going off on a bit of a segue here. You talked about them scraping 40 websites to get vessel details. So we all know anyone who works in logistics, sailing schedules nowadays are not worth what it's written on. They tell you your shipment's supposed to arrive on the 30th of July, but it arrives in August somewhere, or maybe not at all. Yeah. So what sort of a increase in accuracy did your customers see?
Okay, great question, Dr. Raymond. So I think when it comes to accuracy, we are looking at 100% accuracy. The reason being, most of these websites undergo a lot of change. They are updated without prior notice. It could be a new template that has been put up. It's a new schedule that has been suddenly flashed up on the website, that even us as humans, we take some time to understand and then navigate through. Now, because RPA is not just about process automation, it also has an intelligence factor to it, right? We use technologies like computer vision, and we use AI and machine learning to make sure the robot kind of understands what changes are being incorporated in the website as it spends more time going through the schedule, looking at the data, and then updating its own inbuilt algorithms to make sure that next time if it encounters a different layout or a different template or a different set of data points, it can pretty much carry out the task very comfortably. Now, I'm not saying
it becomes predictive almost. That means there's that machine learning element that Kamyong talks about. And then so the application becomes, doesn't just become process oriented, but you also augment that with predictive analytics to a certain degree, yes?
That's correct. That's correct.
Well, we had an interesting question come in here from Chun Lai. Great question. I think you guys saw it as well. The challenge with data scraping from websites, right, is that capture. So whilst there are tools to overcome this, are there any legality concerns about scraping data off these websites?
Maybe I can take that, Paras. Yeah. Actually, the first question, even before we talk about RPA, right? In fact, CAPTCHA is meant to stop RPA, right? Because one of the things that we always do is that the most simple CAPTCHA is that, you need to put a tick and say, I am not a robot. Yep. And think about it, asking a robot to check on that box to say, I am not the robot, right? It just doesn't sound totally correct. So in terms of the legality, is really between you applying the RPA and the website owner, right? The page designer, yeah. And you may probably want to check, up to you to decide whether you want to go ahead and check that, because from a pure technology point of view, there are certain things that we can do, and it's kind of a little bit limited, I will admit here. All right. One thing we need to also understand is that RPA sometimes is not meant to automate 100% of a process. Yeah. So sometimes maybe certain part of the process cannot be automated, and CAPTCHA is a very good example. Although there are, yeah, right. And actually, the other great example is really like your two-factor authentication. Right. So when you log into the bank and then you get an SMS on your phone, and honestly, there's really kind of no way, right, for the robot to really go to your phone and read your stuff. Okay, unless they send an email, then again we have a way to do that. So in terms of CAPTCHA, I know that there are actually other tools available, website available, yeah, where you kind of pay some subscription, like 2 cents per CAPTCHA, and they kind of allow you to give to an API call, and then they actually kind of return the results you pass in the website. So those kind of API calls and web page can actually be built into part of the process, right? So that you can overcome it technically, right? The legal part, as I mentioned, is a different story. Okay, but nonetheless, there are certain CAPTCHA nowadays that are actually pretty challenging. Yeah, it's not the normal, a word and you're supposed to kind of just type in the word, right? This is tiger or cat or whatever. I've seen complicated CAPTCHA like the brown frogs jump over the cat, and each word is a different color, and they ask you what's the color of the word cat. Yeah, right. So it gets pretty complicated. Yeah. So I'm not sure whether, Paras, you have anything to add there?
No, I think we get the point. Thanks, Camille. So yeah, I have a problem with CAPTCHA all the time because they say how many bicycles are there in this grid, and sometimes I cannot tell. So what you're saying is that we actually need to ask permission from sites. So it's not just about deploying the bot. It's also about making sure that we have the permission from the sites to scrape it. Yeah.
The compliance. Yeah.
Yes. All right. Cool. Great. Look, I think you've got a video to share with us, a demo. In the interest of time, can we keep this brief? Because I'm looking at the questions here. We've got tons of questions coming in. So maybe you can just give us that quick demo, and then we can continue with the questions.
Oh, sure. No worries. So let me share the screen here. Okay, so we're just going to take a very simple overview of a very common typical process like order fulfillment and quotation generation, which I believe any organization that is in this industry would do on a daily basis. Now, this example that we're going to show you is for one of our largest customers in logistics industry, who is running distributed warehouse management. And the simple example that you're going to see now is everything, once we play the video, is carried out by the robot in terms of logging inside the ERP system, navigating to the order details, creating the order details inside the system, updating the records for the customer. And as you can see, the bot is seamlessly moving across various applications. It could be your ERP, it could be your email, it's a PDF. And the interesting part which you notice over here is that the PDF could be in any format. So again, the intelligence part really comes back to make sure that the bot is not stuck with a predefined template. It can have enough understanding to see how the data could be sieved through, enter into the data inside the system seamlessly without any interruptions or without any hiccups. and make sure that, the order details, it could, be a big order. Like in this case, we have three different items, different quantities, etc., coming through. And the bot is seamlessly navigating through without any interruption. And very simply, once the orders are entered in, it just generates a quotation. Quotation will be generated seamlessly, and then it will be dispatched to the customer, and making sure that the human operator or the human manager is well notified that the task is done, and any intervention that is required can be brought in, like I said earlier, synergistically as well. Whatever you saw in the email, there was no human intervention, everything carried out very seamlessly by the robot. So there we are. So in a matter of less than 2 minutes, the robot is able to generate the quotation seamlessly, send it out to the customer.
Brilliant. Thanks, Paras, for that example. I've got a question that someone wants to ask live. So, that's one of the great things about one of our webinars. James, can you allow the question to go live? Hi, Sanjay. What's your question for us?
Yeah, Ray, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. What's your question, Sanjay?
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ray. I appreciate it. And thanks a lot, Kiaming and Paras. Question for Paras, because just now you showed something which really interests me a lot. My question is, can I use RPA to automate my end-to-end processes in my supply chain? And if the answer is yes, do I need to reorganize the team? And let me give you a quick scenario. I'm just looking at not a very complex business, Paras, $200 million B2B, less than 1,000 SKUs, very repetitive organizations. Can I do all the way from order management until even planning, purchasing, procurement, logistics, distribution, and even invoice matching till the end?
Absolutely, Sanjay. Great question. Just to let you know, as I said earlier, RPA does not depend on the size of the company, the number of employees you have, the turnover, or even the industry you come from. Think about RPA as a digital assistant who's available to you. And right from the start to end, be it invoice processing, be it order fulfillment, be it payment reconciliation, be it return processing, all these processes have been successfully automated using RPA. But of course, I need to throw in a caveat over here. We need to review the process first, arrive at the conclusion whether it is suitable, optimized for RPA in its current form, or do we need to make some minor adjustments, minor improvements, and then bring about the digital assistant to work for you. I hope that answers your question, Sanjay.
Thanks, Paras. Thank you for that. Hey, look, we just had a comment here from Shweta Chandra, where she says that she tried automating capture using APIs, but the results weren't foolproof, so they decided to use attended modes, user entering capture via dialog box. I think that's just something for the audience, because we see the questions coming, and I thought I'd share that. Okay. There's a question from Alvin. Maybe you can tackle this one briefly, Paras. So most changes in logistics vessel schedules need human intervention to reflect the real-time data. So can this be partly automated? I don't really think it's an RPA question. It's more about GPS and geo positioning. But maybe you can take a quick stab at that.
Sure. I think that's a very relevant question. And yes, to answer that, if we are not going to automate the vessel scheduling process 100% on RPA, there is still a human element to it. So the real-time data processing that the human needs to do, you could still do that. Whereas part of it, let's say 50 or 60% of, which is quite repetitive and rules-driven, that is something that you can deploy the robot on.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Great, short, brief answer. So I got a question here, one of the earlier questions that we had from Gabriel, With the insurgence of big data usage and new forms of machine learning like neural networks, does this allow machines to fully make decisions for the supply chain manufacturing process? So not just augmenting or taking the machine out of people, but taking people out of the process altogether. Who wants to tackle that one? Kam-Yong, Paras?
I can take a shot there first. So I think this whole thing about automation is not just about RPA, right? It actually encompasses a broad area that includes also AI and machine learning. And I'm sure we have seen a lot of the science fiction movies, right, where the robots are taking over the world, not just taking over some of the work. So definitely, So definitely, the technology is getting more and more advanced as we go along, and we do expect that it will be able to handle more and more cognitive work, right, based on machine learning, right? We have seen that, all of us have seen that, right, from self-driving cars and drones and so on and so forth. And the reality here is that we RPA working with machine learning, right? Because machine learning, usually when you have a model, it solves a very specific problem. Okay, but there's also some upstream as well as downstream process that will actually kind of complete your whole business process. Yeah, so that's where how the two technology comes together to actually solve the bigger problem rather than just a very niche thing. And yes, we do see a trend where people are actually going to automate more and more cognitive processes rather than just the simple rule-based stuff. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks, Camille. So there's a question from Gabriel.
Okay.
In this Industry 4.0 era, is it easy then to shift from one industry into the supply chain industry? And what skills and experiences are required to merge in seamlessly with this digital transformation? So if I understand the question correctly, how does one move from one industry into the supply chain industry, capitalizing on Industry 4.0?
So I think I'll take that question, Dr. Iman. So when it comes to Industry 4.0, we know that the boundaries are pretty much dissolved if we would want to accept that part. And RPA is one such agnostic technology. I would say not just RPA, but essentially the entire concept of AI, RPA, machine learning working together now, which we call as hyper automation, to allow movement between various industries very, very seamlessly. Let me give an example over here. I'll make a quick and short one. So we have a few customers who are multinational corporations, and they have different distributed business segments that they run through. Supply chain logistics is, of course, a very important part of that. But at the same time, they also have a manufacturing, they also have distributions, and then they also have a retail side to it. Now, with integrated supply chains, and with the fact that we are bringing in digital supply networks, we are able to bring in and we are able to connect all those various entities, the various group businesses that this customer of ours runs. And within RPA, what we have done is that RPA works very nicely across various entities that we have at the back end. At the front end, we have also brought in artificial intelligence. We have enabled AI-powered chatbots who interact with the customers, with the stakeholders, and even certain frontline employees, who are managing the cargo that is coming in from the distribution setup to all the way to the retail setup that they have over here, and give a very seamless experience to the end users to make sure that the business carries on. It is, of course, I would say, still evolving. We are not there 100% where we can have complete hands-off. Like I said earlier, the human intervention is still there. And to I think further substantiate that, I think Kumyong, if you would want to share some examples on, of course, how UiPath is also helping cutting the bridge with some great projects that have been deploying across the world. So yeah.
So maybe just briefly also is that in fact UiPath actually even work with a lot of the polytechnics and the ITEs in Singapore to introduce, right, as part of the course module for certain course. And you will actually be surprised, right, that actually a lot of these institutions in Singapore, I mean, those from Singapore audience will know, is actually not so much part of the computer science diploma or ITE. They actually start incorporating it into like finance and accounting courses and so on. And I won't be surprised that at some point in time, this will actually expand to all other disciplines in terms of becoming a basic digital skills that everybody will actually need to possess, right, in order to enter into this Industry 4.0 and in this whole digital world itself here.
Okay. Actually, I've seen a couple of questions come in on this issue, and this issue is about there are so many logistics and supply chain processes that could potentially be automated. So how should companies go about prioritizing the candidate processes for RPA? And I don't know, presumably ROI is a component of that decision. Kamyang, do you want to talk about this?
Yeah. Let me take that up. So I think I think the example that we saw earlier about order fulfillment and quotation generation, though it is a very common process, and it doesn't require too much of innovation or intelligence over there. still the benefits that we are talking about, Bob, are, is like unparalleled to what you do in, if you're doing the process manually. So let me just quickly go back to one of the slides that I had put up for the same process. If I can just take a minute to share that now. Let me give you an idea about what kind of ROI are we looking about for such a simple process to start off with. So it should be coming up now. Great. So we have considered some very important critical ROI factors, and we have looked at a before and after automation scenario. Now, just to make matters very simple, this customer had almost only 100 or 200 process orders that they could fulfill when they had a very manual approach to carrying out this process. With automation, the entire capability has jumped at least 5 to 6 folds. And now they're able to process more orders because they're working in a distributed management system. Also, at the same time, the average order processing time has reduced by 1/5 or even 1/6 in this case. And the robot is able to process these orders seamlessly. And a very important part is the fact that the processing cost. Now, it might seem a very small number. Before automation, they were spending 70 cents per transaction. I'm not talking about per order. I'm not talking about per document. I'm talking about per transaction. It was 70 cents, but it might look small. But after automation, we are able to cut it down by almost 90% and bring it down to just 9 cents per transaction. Now, that's a huge, huge cost saving. If you compare with the kind of orders just one warehouse is managing and the number of orders that they're processing on a daily basis. And last but not the least, we are also seeing the improvement that we are seeing in order fulfillment. Now, before automation, because the humans are involved, we tend to get a bit complacent. We are, distracted by a lot of, other things that we do. And of course, it's a monotonous process, so we are prone to make mistakes. So we had an error ratio of almost like 10% per 1,000 transactions. But with RPA, we have a 0 error ratio that we are achieving for the last couple of months that we have deployed this process. And of course, this is now being replicated for our customers across the board. So they're implementing this across their other warehouses as well. So that is one aspect of ROI. But I think, of course, Kamyong, you could also probably add in some flavor on what other benefits are we looking at for RPA in a very broad sense.
Yeah, I guess very briefly, in the interest of time, right? Other than the ROI part, we also look at what are the low-hanging fruits, right, from a prioritization perspective. That means other than having big business benefit from ROI perspective, we want to look at something that's low complexity, right? Something that we can actually develop and configure and deploy very fast, right? Maybe within 2 to 3 weeks versus something that takes 4 to 5 months, right? So that the whole, justification becomes a lot easier. And that can be looking at it from, the how rule-based the thing is, how many applications you need to interact with, and so on and so forth. Yep. So that's the other aspect that we want to look at.
All
Thanks,
right.
Camille.
Ron.
Yes, thanks, Bob. So, related to that question, as we start to wrap up, we've been going now for 45 minutes. Great session, but where do I start? What's the basic requirement for a setup RPA? That's a question from Jack as well. Where do I start? You've sold me, I'm convinced. So what next?
Right. So I think that's the most important question of this session today. Where do we start? So let me put this first before I explain to you, how this first step could be taken. Let's be very clear about the fact that RPA is not an IT project. Okay, RPA is an organization-wide transformation initiative.
No project is an IT project, Paras. IT is just a tool.
Yes, IT is only an enabler. It's just a supporting, role that IT plays. And that's why, every department, every unit, every team who owns up a process probably should think about getting into RPA. Now, having said that and clear the conception that's not an RPA initiative, let me just give you a quick example with the help of a slide, how you could start your journey. And this is very generic. It could be like, you've already started a few things on RPA. So you could pretty much, put yourself in which part of this journey you fit in. So to start off the things in RPA, it's a big company, or maybe you're a small SME, or you're in a small setup, you can just take up 1 or 2 processes which are very suitable for RPA. Of course, we as your partners could come in, we can look at the process and we can advise you what kind of ROI and benefits you could perhaps look into it. We can build up a POC or a pilot for you, train your team, make sure you understand your new digital assistant or your workforce, and then you also kind of measure the adoption and viability of implementing this RPA in your organization. And this could take as low as just a couple of months or a few weeks to start off things. Then from there, once you have initialized and you've seen that you've tested the waters, you have some feedback, you can pretty much jump into the next stage where you could probably start scaling RPA across your organization. By that, I mean that, in a few months, probably in the next quarter, you could think that other departments could be looped in. And you start off by setting up a core team. We have different type of people inside the organization. Some would love RPA, some would hate RPA. It's really up to this core team to make sure that they're the right advocates and proponents of RPA. And we can also run a lot of think and learn initiatives. We can have, open lunches and forums where people could be invited in a workshop, and then they can see and they can feel, what this digital assistant RPA could do for them. And let's say within, say 6 months time, when you're done with this, you can really start thinking about making RPA as your way of life. You can drive automation across your entire enterprise, across various geographical, offices and teams that you have. And we can bring in, the intelligent part to it using data sciences, neural networks, artificial intelligence inside, and make sure that this virtual workforce or digital workforce is part of your supply chain planning, part of core operations and logistics as well. And of course, we can build in up a continuous improvement process inherent to your RPA initiative, and make sure we learn and improve as we go along. And within 1+ year, you could have, who knows, you could have a few hundred bots running for you seamlessly at the back end.
Fantastic. Thanks for that. So 2 parts to this question. Yeah, one is from Alvin. Alvin asked it's RPA, we have that perception or belief that it's relatively expensive. So how could a small company like an SME able to manage the funding as well as cost and effect justification to their top management? Yeah. So, but related to that as well, this implementation that you've shown is 12 months. Do people actually have the time to wait for 12 months to implement support? So the cost question and the time question, how do you address that?
Okay, let me just quickly take that up, Dr. Imran. I'll start with the second question. I'll answer that first. So we don't need to wait for 12 months. Like I said, this is a phase-wise journey that we have shown to you. If you are talking about, starting small and taking the baby steps towards full automation, within a couple of months, you can have your couple of processes already live, belonging to the department or the team. They can start using the benefits. And then you scale up in a very progressive manner. So you don't need to invest for full 12 months. I mean, nothing taking away if you think that after 3 months, RPA is not really your cup of tea, and you're better off, working in how you are. No obligations. You can always fall back and you can look at other technologies. So like I said, it's a very process-specific, non-intrusive technology. So that's the part that you don't need to wait for 12 months. Now, quickly coming on to the cost part, I do understand that a lot of our audience may be from the SME sector itself, and they are very, very cost conscious. So the good news is that Singapore government, and I can also share some example that governments all across the globe are actually providing a lot of subsidies and benefits, or even grants, to make sure that you can adopt this technology in the form of digital transformation, in terms of business transformation as well. In fact, just to give you some example, in Singapore, all the ministries and associations have actually rolled up a lot of initiatives, a lot of grants for grabs, and we are helping a lot of our customers as well. For example, we have fintechs and startups who are leveraging on MAS's digital grants that are being offered. We have customers who are using ESG grants, PSG grants also, to make sure that they can roll out their operations within Singapore and beyond Singapore as well. So not to worry. RPA is not a very expensive technology. You are not being logged in for 6 months or 1 year or multiple years. We're talking about a few weeks where you could see results in front of you. And even if you are running short of funds and grants, we have a lot of options available from the government, from various associations, to help you kickstart your journey.
So, and I guess the short answer to that question, Paras, is please contact paras@tabs.com.sg. Yeah?
Yes,
right? Because we've seen the question come in from Nathan as well about how to calculate the ROI. And I think Shweta is asking the same question as well, because we all want to look at payback, right? And ROI. So, great session. I have one last question here. But actually, I don't. We're actually out of time. So, Bob, back to you.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. No, I agree, Ramon. I think it's been a great session and very good to see the level of participation today, and also the extent of the engagement. I think shows there's a very high level of interest in RPA and IA in this industry, in logistics and supply chain. So, I mean, I really want to thank both of our guests today for their insights and contributions to this debate. So that's Paras Chana, Vice President, Digital Innovations at Total EV Solutions, and Kok Kam Yong, Pre-Sales Team Leader, ASEAN at UiPath. And of course, not forgetting my wonderful co-host, Dr. Ramon Krishna. And of course, there will be future Logistic webinars on a variety of topics related to logistics and supply chain. So do look out for those and make sure you attend our future events. So until then, I'd like to say that's goodbye from me and goodbye from my fellow guests today.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Stay
Thanks,
safe.
Bob. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. Yeah.
Great
Bye.
session.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye and see you again.